the mushrooms unlock keys to doors. And they're saying that, a lot of the indigenous artwork isn't just art, but it's a key. And they also open up energy portals to, wherever they're from. And so for me, this could be something that's all in my head. It could be woo-woo and she, but it makes me feel good about my practice to think that if I can find mushrooms with a genetic source to where my people came from, then when I consume them, it creates the pathway for my ancestors to give me downloads, to connect, to commune, with the peoples and the energies that got me to where I am right now.
Welcome to the Set and Setting podcast with Madison Margolin. As a journalist, Madison has spent years exploring the intersection of psychedelics, cannabis, and culture. This podcast brings together thought leaders from today's psychedelic renaissance to talk about the role of psychedelics in our inner and outer lives. You can support this podcast and find additional resources at BeHereNowNetwork.com/Madison.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Set and Setting podcast. Our guest is Reggie Harris. Over the past 3.5 years, Reggie has established Oakland Hyphae, which hosted the Psilocybin Cup, now known as the Hyphae Cup, and a number of psychedelic conferences across the country, which were the most impactful psychedelic events in the space. He's a co-founder of Hyphae Labs, which is leading the industry in psychedelic mushroom potency testing, and has also founded Hyphae Nootropics, offering adaptogenic medicinal fungi from cordyceps to lion's mane. Reggie is a strong advocate for who he calls, quote, the little guy, or the legacy plant medicine workers, whose perspective he uplifts through his publication, Hyphae Leaks. It is Reggie's goal to create barriers of entry to prevent big money interest groups from the same industry takeover that they did with cannabis. Ultimately, he aims to protect the legacy plant medicine workers from corporate vultures. Wow, Reggie, thank you so much for coming on to the show today.
Yo, I'm honored to be here. I feel like it's been a long time coming. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to really explore, why are you passionate about this? It seems like you're doing so much. Obviously, most of it is centered around mushrooms, but also you have a little bit of a mission behind it too, with, protecting these legacy plant medicine workers. So why is this your passion? How'd you get here?
I could give you the long story, but because we only have an hour, I'll give you the short. You oftentimes hear people talk about the mushrooms kind of leading you somewhere. The mushrooms told you something, or like I used to work in Jamaica at a mushroom retreat, and the woman that we called the Mushroom Queen said that everything is in divine order, and I believe that. So randomly, when I was younger, Eminem had this song about mushrooms out. I was a huge Eminem head. Mushrooms sounded appealing, so I was launched onto a journey to kind of figure out, all right, where are these mushrooms, what it's all about. And I found the mushrooms, I ate the mushrooms, and my first download was that you need to sell the mushrooms. And so in high school, I started selling mushrooms. In college, I sold mushrooms until I dropped out and went to Europe to work on the largest mushroom farm in the world. After that, the laws in Europe changed, which made mushroom farming difficult. So, I came back and kind of plugged into real life for a little bit. But again, everything works in divine order. And when I stopped selling mushrooms, I got into politics and organizing. And, I got a political education from a lot of good people. And, I did politics and activism for a few years, and then circumstances led me back to the mushroom space. Oakland decrimmed in 2019, and almost immediately, I jumped right in. I already had genetics, built out a lab. And from there, we haven't stopped running. We hit the ground running, and here we are.
So since you've been involved in the psychedelic space, it sounds like since teenager, really, how have you seen it evolve and take shape? And how has the ethos of the mushrooms themselves kind of influenced the industry, and how is also, like you said, corporate interests attacking it in a way?
So I mean, the mushroom space itself has evolved at light speed since I was in it. You know, but I also think that I was blessed to work at a very high level in mushrooms in terms of specificity and scale, and even the shit that we were doing. Back then, most people just, I hate the word, but shrooms were shrooms. There was, you were lucky if you knew what a golden teacher was, or a tie, I don't even think that ape was a thing back then, but it was just, you were lucky to get them. And most people didn't separate characteristics or didn't think about potency. There was really very little science conversation. And it was almost completely a white dominated space as far as I knew, up until, I don't think that I worked with any more than a handful. And keep in mind, I've been doing this for over 20 years. And I think in over 20 years, up until 2019, one hand, probably half a hand, I could count all the Black people that I worked with in the space. Now, I went in 2020, I went to the Detroit Psychedelic Conference, and that was the first conference where I saw, oh shit, all right, like Black people are out here, they're doing it. Not only are we Black people out here doing it, but we're not Oreos. Like we've done the research to connect the medicine to Africa, and diving into indigenous roots. So it's changed a lot for me, a lot to the better. We're talking about potency now, and we're actually to the point now where we're questioning what the fuck is potency really, or what is a dose? How does one define dosages when there's a range of different potencies with various mushrooms? 3.5 on mushroom A is not going to be the same impact as 3.5 on mushroom B. And so, a lot, and it's expanded, and people are out of the closet, and there's fucking mushroom stores.
So I have a lot of questions about mushroom potencies and stuff like that, but you mentioned something that I don't want to gloss over, which is that, kind of people looking at indigenous roots, and like you were saying at the Detroit Psychedelic Conference, connecting with other Black people who, have connections to mushrooms. So what is it like, what did you learn, connecting with these other people in Detroit or wherever? And what does like the culture and the heritage kind of teach us, or, what's the background there?
For one, what I'll say is that in any community, I feel like in any community you have to have, and some people might think that like I'm being reductionist or like being very basic with my outlook, but I do think that it's important for you to have people who you can relate to on a deep level in any community. And yes, psychedelics is a common thread that can bring a lot of people together, but deeper, there's cultural roots where we can connect without even saying, like without even speaking. We can look at each other, we can play some music, and we all are communicating on the same wavelength. I think that's important for people to be able to drop in and feel fully comfortable and be able to breathe in the space rather than be, well-meaning or not, being a token or being a specimen to be observed by folks that don't necessarily know you. One of the, again, everything was in divine order. When I finally decided to jump out of the closet in the psychedelic space, the first thing that I did was go to, back in the day, there was a place called The Haven where everybody was there. It was to me, like, that was the good old days. It was the good old days, and it fell apart. But when it was in its heyday, like all the psychedelic organizations and all the players were in one space all the time and very accessible. And I remember I went, and there was my man Kufi Kiri, who at that time was helping with Decriminalized Nature. Now he works with Table of Our Own. And Kufi Kiri and two other Black people. And the first meeting I ever went to, I told my girlfriend at the time, I want to talk to him, and her. And she's Mexican, and she's like, why? And I'm like, because those are all the Black people in the room. And went and introduced myself to them. And to this day, many people that were in that same room, I have fallen out with for one reason or another. But the through line with this community is like, we're rolling. If there's an issue, we're not falling out. We're talking through it. And, it's just, and there's power in protection within those communities as well. I won't go too far into it, but, when there's one or two token Black people that can move around the space, we get absorbed by, the majority white organizations, which, have finances and just connections. So that's where most of us most of us tapped into these organizations. And they know that there's a power dynamic too. We're on an island kind of by ourselves, and if we're by ourselves but not tapped into a deeper community, we kind of are at the behest of whatever they want us to do. We have to dance for whatever access or for whatever check. And if they do something that's like a violation, they can just get it off because there's nobody backing us up. But when we're all connected, even if we're in different organizations, if we're all connected, the propensity for, some of these vultures or some of these bad actors to violate is severely diminished because we all talk, and they know that, okay, they might be able to violate me, but really you're not just violating me, you violating this whole circle, and you got to deal with it. So, and then the other piece to your question was in terms of the ancestry. For me, it was very important. And again, the mushrooms called me to this research. For me, it was very important to know that this fungus that has such a pronounced role in my life was somehow, connected to me in a deeper way than right here. And I remember before even going to the Detroit conference, as I'm cultivating my mushrooms in my lab, I'm trying to find indigenous African strains. I remember I found Transeki, and then, Black people want to take it because we believe that mushrooms open portals. I remember coming across Darren LeBaron. He gave a presentation there, and his presentation was about the ancestral roots of mushrooms in Africa. And I felt like I am home. All right, this is me now. I'm not just, taking it's cool. Like mushrooms are mushrooms, but it makes me feel that more connected because when I take mushrooms, internally, I knew that they were connecting me with the ancestors. And now I have a external validation that, yes, these are opening portals. My people used this before me, and maybe this is how we can communicate through time and space.
Wow. I really love that. So, I've actually, I think, interviewed or, worked a little bit with Darren LeBaron through double blind stuff. But when you talk about these portals, I'm just curious, like what are they opening you up to? Like, what are you learning from them, or what kind of energies are there? And I know that's a very maybe like lofty spiritual question, but
yeah, no, we're rolling. I open the door, so we're gonna walk through it.
The portal.
yeah. It's so. Keep in mind, I'm not the world's master psychonaut. I've just been in it for a really long time, and still haven't worked my way up some of the doses that people are talking about. But for me, very early in my experience with the medicine, I was taken to a place that I couldn't make out, but I understood that these were my people from a long time ago. And they told me, welcome home. And we communicate through a lot of the talks that Baba Kalindi Iyi gave, and his students like Darren and like Mudu they say that the mushrooms the mushrooms unlock keys to doors. And they're saying that, a lot of the indigenous artwork isn't just art, but it's a key. And they also open up energy portals to, wherever they're from. And so for me, this could be something that's all in my head. It could be woo-woo and she, but it makes me feel good about my practice to think that if I can find mushrooms with a genetic source to where my people came from, then when I consume them, it creates the pathway for my ancestors to give me downloads, to connect, to commune, with the peoples and the energies that got me to where I am right now. And so that's pretty much it for me. I'm learning now that even deeper than that, I feel like mushrooms have personalities, and no, mushrooms aren't like weed, but I feel like they have personalities, and so within those types that are sourced from the area, there's a range, and there's regular cubensis like a transeki, but then there's also um, mushrooms like Pinellius bisporus, which is from Morocco, which is a lot nicer of a teacher than, let's say, a transeki. A transeki will teach you something, but there's teachers that'll bust your knuckles, and then there's teachers who will give you sugar and candy. And
So do you, two questions, they're kind of related, but, also tangential. So number one is, what is your mushroom practice? Like, do you have a way of going about it that, just like is your style? And then the other question is relating to kind of ancestor work or connecting to ancestral roots. Are there any rituals or, ways of doing it that you've maybe like learned, from kind of, you know, African traditions or, even just grandparents, from America or whatever that you incorporate into your mushroom work as well?
so, since I started so early, like the whole notion of um, having structured journeys to me is kind of foreign and new. For me, it was always by myself. And I kind of taught myself through trial and error how to treat the journey. I always knew that it was reverent. And so for me, it's, no alcohol, because I feel like the alcohol and the mushrooms fight, and the mushrooms going to win. The mushrooms going to kick the alcohol out your body one way or another. And so just save yourself that pain. Is no alcohol. I believe largely in the whole set and setting concept, where you want to make sure that both your mindset is right, or you're prepared if your mindset isn't right for the downloads that come along with that, and that your setting is right. The environment that you're in has to be comfortable. I would never suggest really diving in to any mushroom for the first time in public. I just wouldn't, because I know that all mushrooms aren't created equal. And so for me, it's making sure that I have a fully charged speaker or a way to listen to some music if I want it. Have me J's rolled ahead of time. If I might not smoke any, but if I want them, making sure that I have plenty of water, because I like water when I'm going through my journey. Making sure that I don't have anything that's going to pop up on my schedule and require me to like fuck up what I'm doing, which generally means that my journeys are at nighttime. And what I'm learning now is I feel like oftentimes people let the journey take them. And maybe it's because I haven't gotten up to a point where my brain isn't in control anymore. But I remember throughout the time, it always used to be a very uncomfortable journey, beneficial, but uncomfortable. And as I've dialed in my personal practice, I can mitigate that both through my brain just thinking, okay, if I feel I'm cold, the power of the magic is that I can think myself out of being cold. Or if I'm anxious, the power of the magic is, I can move around and switch up my environment until I'm settled and good. And then lastly, I am forming a deeper relationship with my cultivators and their medicine. I know exactly where my stuff is coming from. I know what's going into it in terms of energy and, physical input. And I'm out of the stage of picking up random medicine, fucking around and finding out, So in terms of spiritual things, spiritual connections or spiritual rituals, I don't really have any of those. I know a bunch of people who do. and they've invited me to participate many times. They've even told me that I don't have to dose. I can just sit. But for me, just sitting in a room of people who are dosing and I'm not dosing still makes me feel off. So I won't do that. Just like I don't really want to dose around a bunch of people. I want to be, I don't want to have to think about other folks in the space. I don't want to think about how I look or how they perceive me, or I don't want to have to think about if they're comfortable. Because that then you're going on, not only am I going on my journey, but I'm going on their journey with them. And so that's it. My practice is probably less refined than a lot of folks in the space, but what I can say is it absolutely works for me.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about, kind of each species having its own personality and traits and obviously potencies as well. So how has, what are some of your favorite types of mushrooms and, within the psilocybin or psychedelics umbrella? And then also you mentioned in your bio, getting involved with all sorts of like nootropics and lion's mane and, all these other types of functional mushrooms. So how has your relationship with magic mushrooms opened you up to mushrooms at large?
Oh, perfect. So my favorite mushrooms now are what we call exotics. Specifically, I love the Pinaleus bisporus. I love the Pinaleus sempervita, and I love the Pinaleus cyanescens. The only place that I can find these mushrooms on a regular basis is in Minneapolis, and so that's why I'm in Minneapolis once a month, just because it's like the dude is very protective of what he has. He really doesn't even want the mushrooms to go to anybody outside of his community in Minneapolis. I feel blessed to be able to have them, but these mushrooms, the way I came across them was that we tested them in our last Hyphae Cup, and they were second from the top in terms of potency. And I've never felt inclined ever, not once in 3 years of doing this. I've never felt inclined to sample mushrooms that people submitted. But this time I did something, went out there, told myself I'm going to do a New Year journey. So I went to Minneapolis for New Year's. And that's what I did for my New Year's. I got a hotel out there, took the mushrooms, had a great experience. And that's when I realized that, like, okay, this variety is different. Typically, everybody takes cubensis. 99.95% of the people in the world are eating cubensis. Indigenous cultures, however, like in Mexico, a lot of the indigenous cultures and the islands and the Caribbean, like I said, in Morocco, are eating these other types, these exotics. And so I guess I'm blessed to have access to some of the best cultivators in the world and know who they are so I can, kind of experiment. So at this point, I'm not eating anything that's not an exotic specifically grown from this dude in Minneapolis. In terms of the potency or in terms of the personalities, I like to say that the difference for me right now between the mushrooms that I'm eating and the mushrooms that most people have access to is like cubensis mushrooms are like walking through a park on a nice spring day with a friend. Maybe your arms around them, maybe you guys are locked arms, whatever. Maybe you just close vibing, sun's in your face, birds are chirping, just nice and easy. And for me, cubensis can oftentimes be like the difference can be like, you're walking down the sidewalk and a white van pulls up and somebody throws a bag on your head and tosses you in the back and you're off. Sometimes it can be and I don't mean a bad experience. I just mean like jarring and less structured, and you don't really have that much control. So yeah, that's where I'm at with the medicine that I take and the reason that I take it. In terms of the other stuff, it's funny because 3 years ago we did this event on Halloween in Portland. We called it the Convergence, the People's Convergence, and we had a conference like one day, and then the next day we had a foray, and all of us gathered and walked through the woods dressed up in fucking costumes. And I'd done all this shit with mushrooms for all these years. Not once had I gone out and tried to pick a fucking mushroom in nature. And so I kind of started off with like the man-made, sterile, whatever. And so through that, it put me out into the nature. And now I'm here in nature, digging through the fucking dirt, trying to find trumpet mushrooms or whatever. Not trumpet, lobster mushrooms, or change ever. Like I'm out in nature now. I'm learning about symbiotic relationships between the mushrooms and the trees and even the moss that's down there. And so you're just, the mushrooms put me into nature through, I guess, backdoored it. I feel like most people start with mushrooms in nature and then find their way to the psychedelics or to the lab. But it worked in reverse for me. And I remember this woman named Elan, she has Temptress Truffles online. She actually said it. She's like, you doing all that lab stuff. This is where the lab stuff comes from, right here. Do your history. And so that always stuck with me because now, I'm excited to get out there. And when I walk to go fishing, I got to walk a mile through this park and I feel like I got mushroom eyes. I can see the fucking jack-o'-lanterns over there. I can see the lion's mane up there, whereas before it was nothing to me.
So, people often talk about, the mushrooms having their personality of their own, right? They're giving messages to people and, the mushrooms led you here, there, called you, whatever. And so my question is, given what's going on with the whole psilocybin industry, both, whether it's like grown or foraged mushrooms or even now synthetic psilocybin, which we're seeing in more clinical contexts, how do you think like the sort of spirit of the mushrooms of psilocybin is gonna, is affected, I guess, by the current state of affairs? And I know that's a very kind of like trippy, lofty question, but, it does feel like when people talk about there being like a spiritual aspect or personality to these substances, that, how does that then like respond to or reconcile, like you said, corporate takeover or these kind of dubious interests that are getting involved?
I'll answer your question to the best of my ability. I feel like, again, everything is divine order. I feel like the mushrooms have already set into motion what's needed for them to be protected from with bad intent. That could be woo-woo talk from me, but when I look around the atmosphere, when I look around the landscape, the people who were in it, for the most part, the people who were in it for the right reasons were the people who were here early, and we're a tight-knit community. I see the space, the numbers, and the people who are interested going like on hockey stick type trajectory, like straight up. But we still are the folks who hold the community. These people are still looking to us to figure out. We set the rules in our house, and so I think that the mushrooms got it worked out. When we see pieces of legislation, well, I don't take that all the way. Well, I was going to say when we see pieces of legislation coming forth that aren't all the way solid, we see them not passing. But that's not totally accurate because we see Oregon right now, and there's kind of like a breakdown happening there. We see Colorado right now, and it seems like people are saying that there's a bait and switch there, and the only people that might be able to move around freely in the psychedelic space in Colorado are clinical models. So they're talking about that. But even those, when we talk about the downfalls of legalization in other cities, yes, it might suck for Oregon and Colorado, but those are 2 states out of 50. And we still have the added benefit of now learning from what's going on out there. So, for instance, here in California, we have recently launched the Cognitive Freedom Initiative that would provide framework for statewide legalization here in California. And that framework, that language is largely based upon lessons that we've drawn from both here in California in terms of cannabis, uh, Oregon in terms of what's going on there, and Colorado, what's happening out there. So I think that the mushrooms will protect themselves. I think that I know that I can't predict the future, but I know that the people that the community is in place, and there's enough people on the ground that believe in the fact that it's sacred. And yes, these mushrooms can provide a way for one to make a life, but I don't think that the mushrooms are in alignment with greed. I feel like there's enough for everybody to have some, as long as one person doesn't take it all. Yeah, I feel like it'll be all right, but I also feel like the mushrooms have brought warriors into the space to fight to make sure that, we're not just handing this thing over to people who want it all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there's a problem, and you didn't ask me this question, but I don't think that there's a problem generating income in this space. I do think that there's a problem being greedy.
Yeah. So what would the ideal political and economic or policy model look like with regard to psilocybin? Like, and we have a few examples of jurisdictions that have already, started to reform their laws, but those can be picked apart. So what would you say is the best approach?
In a perfect world, I would like to see outright decriminalization statewide, with some sort of trigger to ban people with godlike money coming in. Because that's, for me, that's the piece that fucks things up. When companies can afford to run a loss for 5-6 years while everybody else gets driven out of business, that's not fair. And when people can afford to produce things on such a scale that they bottom the prices out, that's not fair. And the people, that happens when you have institutional money in the game. In reality, and more accessible, what we've submitted is a framework that will legalize a number of psychedelics, legalize them for sale, legalize them for possession, legalize them for cultivation. And the reason that I say realistically legalize is because the one thing about decriminalization that doesn't work well for me, and doesn't work well for, I think, people of color, specifically Black people, is giving police the discretion to decide on the spot if they're going to cite you with simple possession, which would be okay under most decrim framework, or possession with intent. And, I've had a number of run-ins with police throughout my life, and I think that 90% of them have been negative, and probably 75% of those have involved police telling lies. I know that when they're taught this in the police academy, when you catch somebody, you don't charge them with what they actually did. You overcharge them, and you hit them with everything in the book to make them scared so that they'll plea out. And so, as long as the current state of our policing system is what it is, I think the best bet for Black people as a culture in this environment to move around is some sort of legal framework that takes the police out of the equation. Yes, this is what I'm doing. Leave me the fuck alone. Not, I remember I used to run political campaigns, and in Staten Island, New York, which is, when I took the job, I did not know what Staten Island was. I know now. But I remember taking this job in Staten Island, and I was running a congressional campaign, and I was driving through the North Shore doing spot checks on my organizers, and I was driving a Mercedes. In most of New York, you can't take a right on red, but in this particular location in Staten Island, you could. And I didn't know that. And there's this car blaring on the horn right behind me. long story less long, I couldn't turn. So when I finally could turn, this man jumps out the car and he's pulling my car door open. I don't know who this is. I'm thinking it's the robbery. I don't see no badge. And then he puts the gun up. And at this point, I had the camera. And so I took the pictures to wrap it up. The police pulled me out of my car for no reason. It was an illegal stop. They pulled me out of my car and they found a box cutter that I used. If you run any campaigns, you know, you get lit and merch and shit that you have to hand out and put in people's doors. I had boxes all day. I had a box cutter in my car. And they told me it was a box cutter switchblade and they were going to charge me for it. and they did all of this. And ultimately they did all of this. And while the one cop is trying to scare the daylights out of me, telling me he's going to charge me for a switchblade, which is illegal, I didn't have a switchblade. The other police is in my car taking the memory card out of my phone so that those pictures I took of him, that they have. And so I say all this to say, you know, it's not news to anybody that these police are out of control. I can give you, that's one story. Personally, I can give you like 6 like that, where they just are foul and they lie. I can give you stories from New York to California. And so I say in a perfect world, decrim, because in a perfect world, that sort of behavior from the law enforcement wouldn't exist, and we could trust them to do the right thing. This is not a perfect world. And so to take the bullshit that they do out of their hands and keep as many people safe and truly out of jail, for me, a legalization framework would work best.
Wow. Wow, that's a really, really disturbing story. I mean, I fully agree that cops have no place in any drug enforcement paradigm, but you know, specific to mushrooms as well. Wow.
The good news is I sued those police, and the state of New York had to pay me $10,000, but it took me like 2 or 3 years to get the shit, and I still had to go through the shit, you know.
Wow. That's so crazy, but at least you got 10K out of it.
Sue the police.
Total. I'm just curious, like, are there other instances of, you know, is that the only time you've sued cops, or have you heard any other good cop, you know, stories with police lawsuits? Because that's an interesting approach, you know, I guess, especially like, you know, I grew up my dad's a criminal defense lawyer. So I've been hearing stories of cops being, you know, shady ass, you know, all sorts of name calling my whole life. But yeah.
Unfortunately, most people don't know about it. I got lucky because I was an organizer in New York. I was connected with people who knew lawyers. So my lawyer, her name was, I fucked with her. Her name was Amy Rameau, this Haitian woman. Woo! I've never seen somebody handle police like that. Oh my God. I have never seen people talk to police that way. I've never seen police so compliant. I remember being in her office. I had to meet with internal affairs to do this investigation. And like, she is just handling them, saying any old sort of shit, but she did it for free up front, and she took a cut of my winnings on the back end. I think that most people just don't know that exists. I think that people think that it's easier just to go about it. If I knew now what I knew then, I probably have 4 or 5 more lawsuits under my belt. But up until then, it was just like, all right, it happened. Mm-hmm. What next? Who's gonna believe me? You know, by the grace of God, in that instance in Staten Island, there was a black man standing in an auto garage. There was a garage, and it was the garage door was up, and it was dark, and he was standing there just looking at the whole thing. And when I'm arguing, I saw him put his hand up and just say like this. And so I shut up, because at that point I knew that he saw it and he had me, and they didn't see him. You know, they were too busy wilding. So again, everything is in divine order. But I highly encourage anybody who has any problems with police, do 2 things every single time. You want to put that complaint in, because it might not help you, but they will continue that behavior and it will build up in their file. Even though in New York it's fucked up, because a police has to give you permission to get their behavioral record. but if people like me come along and there's a history of malfeasance, it helps other people down the road and it's very difficult, but could lead to the police being fired.
Wow. Wow. Okay, good to know. These are all really, really good tips. I didn't think we were going to get here in the conversation. But it's really, really important stuff. I think people, it's so funny because it's, you both of us probably talk about psychedelics for a living and, are often in possession of these things. And, I'm so blasé sometimes, with this, knowing that, like the way that I move through the world and appear and whatever doesn't really necessarily make me any kind of target. And then again, like, it's sometimes easy to forget what we're doing and, that it's technically considered crime. My dad always reminds me, he's, like I said, he's a criminal defense lawyer and he specializes in, cannabis and drug cases. So, that's always really never quite at the back of mind, but at least in the middle, if not front sometimes. So is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to add, discuss? Yeah.
So my last piece is this, and I'll say it quickly. I have a bunch of projects that I've started. The most recent project that I am involved with is something that I'm very, very proud of. And it's a Substack publication called Hyphae Leak. I have found that I occupy a very unique space within the psychedelic community, being able and being with like community every single day, but also being able to sit in some of these more high level meetings where I hear about legislation before most people. And I like to make sure that I share that information with the public who might not have access to the people in the room that I have. And so Hyphae Leaked is a publication that we've launched. We have a team of 5 writers, very great writers that I've worked with before. They're all of the community, either cannabis or psychedelic. And so if you are interested in keeping up with current events, Hyphae Leaks Substack online. There's a free version, but if you want the good stuff, we're asking for $10 a month. That helps us keep our writers paid and us protected. And so that support is great. We're not out here just trying to write, but we're trying to write relevant stories to push the community and the culture forward as well as protect it. So that's that. IG is Oakland.hyphae, spelled HYPHAE, Oakland.hyphae. Follow me on IG. And, come out. We'd love to see you at one of our conferences, or I'd love to see your name pop up on the subscriber list on Hyphae Leak.
All right, awesome. You answered my last question, which is how people can find you and stay in touch with your work. So thank you so much for joining, Reggie. I'm so impressed. I can't wait to hopefully come to one of your conferences one of these days soon again.
Did you come to LA?
Yeah, I came to the one in LA, but I know you did something in DC and you the psilocybin cup, and I gotta be all over the map to keep up with what you're doing. So, really, really just appreciate the role and position that you hold in the psychedelic space, and it's such an inspiration to me, and I hope so, and I assume so many other people. So, thank you for.
I know that I know you're trying to get me off, and I know that you got shit to do, but just let me give you your flowers real quick, because people like you and Shelby and Double Blind have created pathways and lanes to like normalize people like me who probably it's easier to like not listen to. And so thank y'all for platforms like this and platforms like the ones that you created in the past to like that don't gatekeep and like let regular people connect with some of the high have created history and made your mark in the psychedelic space.
Thank you so much. And I hope more of that to come. I'm really, really excited. So thank you. And yeah, more soon.